Um, so you might be able to tell there's a few gray hairs here and here. So I have been at this for quite a while. I actually started off as a hardware engineer many moons ago, shifted over to software because it was just more fun for me. And I have held many roles. I have held project manager, software architect, uh, director, certainly Scrum Master, Agile Coach, played Product Owner. Yes, I played both roles at once. Please don't do that. It's bad. Um, and now I am an independent consultant. My company is K5 Labs. So that's the little logo you see up there on the right. All right, I see about 9 in, so I'm going to move on. Thank you for that. All right. So, um, so a little bit more about my background. This is a little bit of my timeline here. Oh, it got clipped off there. Oh well. So this is the work side of things and the volunteering side of things. So I've worked across various industries. I actually started with Agile in the military, and the funny thing is, they understand, inspect, and adapt really well. When you have pieces of metal flying past you, they inspect and adapt very fast. So I was doing military contracts as a contractor. Not, I did not have the chance to serve, but I have great respect for people who did. But working with them and using Scrum and Kanban, and then from there went to work for what was Rally Software, which for some of you not far off from where you are in Boulder. Worked with many different industries there, worked at a couple other companies, and then for 6 years worked at a place called Sonatype, which you may or may not know, but you might know the name Maven from the Java community. So some of the people who started the Maven, the Apache Maven project, were the ones that started Sonatype. And so with their open source background, they started a fully remote company. And so they brought me on to help them continue to build their fully remote company for about 6 years. And then they were bought out by another organization. And that was a nice opportunity to transition to my own company, K5 Labs. Some of you might be familiar with the book I co-wrote with Johanna Rothman, and that's what will be given out later today. And also, I have run my own meetup. So I was actually one of the co-founders of Agile Orlando. I helped build the Agile Florida network of user groups. So I would say somewhat similar to all of Agile Denver, just we're spread out a little bit further from Miami to Jacksonville to Tallahassee. So all over the state of Florida. And it's basically an informal network to collaborate on various projects and conferences. And I've worked in various conferences as well. And I'm one of the co-founders of an Agile Alliance initiative to help local user groups. So why do I share all this? The funny thing is these were all distributed teams, all of them. So my first actual work started in '92, working in virtual reality, but working with Agile teams and distributed Agile teams was in 2004. Then working from home 2008, then doing it full-time 2014. And that is what allowed me to build experience as what I like to call a distributed Agile guide. I don't like the term expert because there's so much more we need to learn about working distributed. We certainly all have gotten our bumps and bruises these last few months, but there's still more to learn. All right. But enough about me. I want to find out a little bit about you. So if you're still in Menti, let me know what's your current role right now. Are you a Scrum Master or Coach? Are you a product owner? Maybe on a delivery team, developer, QA, user experience? Maybe you're somewhere in leadership, management, director, exec, or maybe some other role that I didn't capture here. right. I was not surprised to have some Scrum Masters and coaches here. That's good. Got some leadership. All right. Delivery team members. All right. And their pets. Awesome. All right. All right. We got a pretty good mix here. All right. See if there's any more votes coming in. All right. So mostly coaches, but we've got pretty much a mix. So that's great because the rest of the talk will really apply to all of these roles. One more thing I'm curious about is, when did you prep to go remote? Were you already remote before 2020? Did you start to prep in January or February? Did you prep in early March, or did you kind of get kicked out the door in mid-March like a lot of people did? Oh, we got many that were remote beforehand. Okay. All right, so we have both ends of the spectrum so far. All right, I'll give another second. Okay. Not too surprised for the Denver area, but we have an international crowd here as well. Ah, okay, one that did prep in January, February timeframe. Okay. Good, good, good. All right, gonna move on. So one last question. Did it feel like this? So, yeah, okay, so some are up and down on that one. So this was actually a picture I staged with my kids in 2016. Little did I know how prophetic this picture was going to be for this time of the year. Oh, yeah, it does seem like this even for me some days. Thank you. Okay, so a lot of people identify with that. All right, so for the rest of this talk, I want to set some working agreements, okay? So as Sherry and Catherine said, please ask questions anytime. We have a small group, so if you want to just come off a mute, that's fine. But if you'd rather put a question in Mentimeter or Zoom, any of those are fine too. I just wanted to play with the new features in Mentimeter. That's why it's an option. So whatever way you feel comfortable. I know sometimes my introvert side likes to use a text-based form of asking questions instead of jumping in. As I mentioned earlier, pets and kids are welcome, but if you've got a lot of background noise, please go ahead and mute. And I like video. I like to see smiling faces, and we've got a few here. And I realize for recording purposes, maybe not everyone likes to do that, but I tend to favor those with video on for book giveaways. Just saying. Just, small hint there. All right. All right. So some are a little bit concerned about video. I get it. I get it. No worries. All right, let's see where we land here. Okay, I will be fair in the giveaway if you don't have video on. All right, I got it. Okay, so that's our lowest value right now. All right, cool. That gives me enough to move on. All right, thank you. So our path today. How we can handle change, and this is handling mind shifts, and we've been through a bunch. 3 disciplines in particular for leading distributed agile teams, and experimenting to explore mind shifts. So those are 3 things we're going to touch on today. All right, so what is a mind shift? And hopefully this is not giving anybody a headache, this picture. So. All right, so as an example, this was one of the first real aha moments for me around a mind shift. So my wife and I were on our first trip to the UK. We had a wonderful time. This was like 4th or 5th day in. We had a long day. We were tired, and I pulled back on the road to head back to the hotel. And you might notice a small problem with this picture. Does anybody notice what the problem is with this picture? I'm driving in the UK.
Wrong side of the road.
Wrong side of the road, yeah. So I made the mistake of using my best practice of driving because I was tired, because I was dealing with some stress trying to get back and even figure out where the hotel was. So you have to be careful about best practices, especially trying to translate them to remote, because they may not work as well, and in some cases they can be harmful. Has anyone ever been up really early or really late for any kind of agile meeting on your remote teams?
Yes.
Perfect effect with the echo. Yeah, so those can be painful and really detrimental to your health if you have to do that for any extended period of time. Even if you try rotating who has to stay up late, it's still painful. So another example of another mind shift is, are time zones really the problem that we have with our remote teams? Is that really the problem? What what I found is it's not so much the time zones, it's the hours of overlap that team members have. So in this example here, we've got a few people in one city, two in another, and then we have another person altogether in another city. In this particular example, Dave is kind of in a senior dev role. He gets pulled in a couple different directions, and so he's not available to the team at certain times of the day. Polly happens to be the product owner, and so she likes to try to knock out customer calls in the middle of the day. However, with this team, notice they all come in at different times of the day. They all take lunch at different times. And this only leaves really 1, 2, 3 hours where they're all 100% available to each other. Notice also they're all in the same time zone. So now we have COVID. Now we have people at home. They have their significant others at home trying to get on their meetings. They have their pets, their kids that are now gone through homeschooling. So what if this was Dave and Polly with kids at home, and this is when they were trying to do school stuff with their kids? Same problem, same problem. So what if we let the team choose their hours and do their own shifting? So maybe Dave decides to shove his meetings toward the end of the day, and he's able to get Fred and Sandra to cover a couple of them. And then Polly spreads her calls out throughout the day. So it doesn't get them much, but it still gets them 1, 2, 3, 4 hours now where they have overlap in their day. So Johanna and I, when we wrote the book and as we were kind of doing our research, 4 was sort of the threshold that we came across to have enough time for minimal collaboration. I'm not saying it's perfect, but you start getting below 4 hours and it gets very difficult for a remote team to use agile techniques. So from those kind of mind shifts, Johanna and I kind of stepped back and looked at, okay, what are some of the bigger shifts that people need to make to think about how they work with remote teams? So the first one is managing for change, and how do you deal with change? The second one is amplifying your communication and collaboration. And some of you might be saying, I'm already on meetings all the time. I don't need any more amplification. Trust me, it's something different. The third is focus on principles over practices, because if you try to bring your existing practices to online, you might be struggling in some ways. So let's take this as an example. Let's say we have a team that they have their ups and downs, but overall they have fairly steady performance. And then a change happens. And that change could be anything. It could be something new that shows up, new person, new tool, new process. It could be some sort of change or something that fails, a tool failure, somebody drops out. We all have to leave the office suddenly because of a pandemic. So any of those things qualify as a change that might impact the team. So our expectations are when we initiate the change ourselves, we think things are going to get better. But when it's imposed upon us, we feel like things are getting worse and worse. So tell you what, in the Zoom chat, tell me, do you feel like the current situation was imposed upon you? Did you have some choice? Or was there something else? So just give me some comments in the Zoom chat.
Current situation of COVID or
Current situation around COVID, yeah. And I see no choice. A little choice in the beginning. Yeah, okay. No choice. Office closed and I didn't want to be there anyway. Okay. Yeah, some choice at first. Yeah. Yeah, so some of the choices that I was hearing from folks is they had a little bit of time to scramble and grab some of their stuff. I've heard stories where a few people or managers left in the office kind of took orders for people and said, okay, what can we get you from the office and sterilize it and make sure we get it to your home office. So there might have been some choice in those situations as well. But it's still having that change imposed upon you that it looks like things are going downhill. Yeah, okay. So what you might expect and what you really experience is this. So give me a thumbs up if you've seen this curve before, or thumbs down if you've not seen this one. So go back into Menti and let me know if you've seen this one. Okay, so some have, probably the coaches and scrum masters. Ah, okay, a bunch. Good, good, good. And two have not. Okay. So, all right, so we're getting almost half and half now. All right, so this curve, it goes by many different names. So if we smooth it out, it kind of looks like a J. So I think from Six Sigma, it's referred to as the J curve. Some know it as the Satir change model. You go further back, it's called the Kubler-Ross model. So it has many different names. And it's been used in many different ways. But what I'm curious now is, where do you feel you are at now on this curve? So number one is where things were. I'd be surprised if anybody says one, but you might feel that way. Two, if you feel like you're still getting changes thrown at you. Three is, I'm kind of resisting the change. I just want things to go back to normal. Four, maybe you've decided to realize there's something new we have to anticipate and I have to just let go of assumptions. Five is, I'm just still struggling, and this is anonymous. Six is, maybe you're starting to get some ideas on how to improve things. Or seven is, we're starting to improve things. We're starting to take those ideas and get to a better place, or we've kind of leveled out. Things are steady for us now. So pick one of those numbers in Menti. And let's see where we're at now. All right, some are at resistance. We want things to go back to the way they were. Some have discovered the transforming ideas. At this point, many people have discovered some better ways of working, and some have leveled out. So this has been interesting because as I have done this talk, I've watched these dots kind of flow across the screen over time. So good to see that some of you have found that. I might give you some other ideas here. So in order to get through this change curve, and it happens to all of us, it all happens to us differently, and the amplitude and the length is different for each of us. So in order to allow us to go through this, we have to be aware of the model and get a sense of where everybody else is on the model. So Carla, this kind of gets back to your question also about how people are struggling with isolation, stress. So that little chart with the numbers on it is a good one to use and say, hey, where are you right now on this chart? So I've done that as an anonymous poll. I've done it as a less than anonymous poll in a retrospective when we have a good amount of psychological safety within the retrospective, and it helps people to talk about where they are or maybe where they're struggling with the current situation. So most people think that in order to be successful remotely, it's about the gear and the tools. And I wish it was that easy. It's not. So as we saw with our experiment at the start of the meeting, sometimes the tools, the process don't quite work the way we expected them to, or something happens and the people maybe aren't ready for the change. So that's where it's important to amplify the communication and collaboration. So in this rather busy diagram, especially in dealing with remote teams, this looks at a scenario of a hybrid team. So right now we're all working remotely, but I am fairly certain that many of you are going to be facing hybrid teams if you didn't have them before. So some that are going to be remote and want to stay remote, some that'll occasionally be in the office and be out, and others that want to just stay in the office. So for those in the office, there's always a very tight affinity, and there's actually ways to measure this. Dr. Karen Lejeski has quite a few books on virtual distance, which measures the impact of technology usage. And while she does say the physical distance has a measure, the actual greater factor is the affinity distance. How close do people feel like they're connected to each other? So when you're in the office and you see people every day, you feel a bit of a connection. And those that you may see through a little tiny screen like we all are right now, you may not have that great of a connection. That's why it's important to have those one-on-ones online and to reach out to those people remotely, because it's a much weaker communication link as shown by the dotted line. And so if this was a team, the overall team affinity is very weak. So what we want to try to do is shift it over. We want to shift it over where there's less emphasis on the location and more on the overall connections on the team. So with most of us working out of our homes, that actually has kind of happened. We're all working as fully distributed teams. In the book, we refer to these as nebula teams. Everyone's kind of out in space, but we have equal communications. And so you see dotted lines between most of the players there. But the idea is, how do you build that team connection? So one way to do that is not necessarily looking at the practices we want to try to pull in, but really what are some of the principles behind those practices? So you might be following Scrum where you're at, and you might have the Scrum values. Some of you might go way back to extreme programming or lean software principles, or you just kind of go with the Agile manifesto principles. The point is, what were some of the key principles that helped your team, the principles and values that helped your team work better together? Because it's not about these, it's really about these when working remotely. As Johanna and I looked at which teams were more successful online, these are the principles we came up with. So having that overlap was probably the most important, having enough time to connect with each other. And that's not just time for meetings. It's really to be able to build up a resilient culture to talk about, hey, how are you doing? How's the family doing? And a third part of that is, where would you like to improve? What kind of things are you hoping to get better at? So when we were back in the office, maybe it was, hey, maybe I want to pick up some new skills somewhere. Maybe I'm interested in learning a little facilitation, or maybe I'm a front end developer that wants to learn more of the back end, or I want to learn a little more UX. How can you as a team talk about that and look for those opportunities to help each other? That's what helps build a resilient culture. Even shifting to COVID, who understands Zoom? Who understands how to run it? Can anybody on the team start it up, or is it only certain people on the team? That's where we need to kind of step back and talk about, does everyone have equal access to the tools? Does everyone have equal training in how to use the tools? And make sure that they can use the tools even if they have access. So from this, actually, let me go back a bit. Let me tell you a story of what one team did. So one remote team that I was working with, they were using Kanban, and they were stepping back and saying, okay, separate stand-ups and retrospectives kind of aren't working for us. And one of the things they realized is, even though they were all remote, they were separated by a few time zones, they were a pretty close-knit team. And this particular team had a lot of integration type of work. And so most of that involved many small short-term projects. So they realized they had to make many small changes quickly. So what they did is they experimented with combining their stand-ups and retrospectives, because they didn't want to have yet another meeting. It was too difficult as a remote team for them to schedule another meeting. So what they did is they were in Slack, so they had their team channel, but they also had what they called the Kaizen channel. This is what they named it. And any topics that came up for anybody, they would put it in this channel. There'd be some conversation in the channel, but they would spend one of their days a week in stand-up going through the list. And if there's anything they could talk about in 5 minutes and resolve, they'd do it. Anything that was longer, that would queue up for the retrospective. So what they ended up doing is they ended up having a poll-based retrospective. A lot of things got resolved in the stand-ups, and some of the longer, more involved things that really required more of an experimental setup is what it basically gave them a backlog for the retrospective. So as they started getting a couple of items on their retrospective backlog, that was the cue to say, okay, we need to schedule the retrospective now. So this allowed them to make many changes very quickly. But when you get through these changes, or you're dealing with multiple changes, you have to be aware of this trough in the J curve, or the change curve, and how you can use this to manage your change through experiments. So many of you are probably familiar with this, as you indicated you were familiar with that curve. It's setting a hypothesis, determining what the experiment is and the details around the experiment. What's the time box, and what results are we going to measure? But also taking that time to learn, what did the experiment tell us? And is there something we can just adopt, or do we need to, did our hypothesis get disproved and we've got to come up with a new hypothesis? So you can make this informal, you can make it formal. You might be familiar with things like the A3 format. There's many different ones out here. This one is from the Agenda Shift site, so I'll share that out on Meetup later. It's also a link in the slides when you look there. But the idea of being very clear what it is you're hoping to prove when you're in those longer experiments. What do you think might be some of the downsides of not doing this, and the upsides of doing it? Who's going to be impacted, and who needs to just be notified? Right, thank you. And what are some of the assumptions and dependencies around this? And is there one experiment or multiple experiments, and are there maybe different members of the team involved? And most importantly is, what did we learn? And get that captured on one sheet. So you have ways to do this in Confluence. If you use Confluence, you could do this in Google Docs. It's a very simple way to set an experiment and make it visible to everyone. I would also recommend, for those of you who do not say you are delivery team members, make sure that you include the delivery team members if they're part of the experiment, because nobody likes to be experimented on. They would prefer to experiment with you in that case. So no lab rats. Some other things is try to avoid too many changes at once. Now, back in March, that was a little hard to control. But when you're dealing with situations where there's a lot of change, is there a way to space out the change? I've certainly seen this with some transformations where it's a big bang transformation and everything kind of goes down from there. So if you don't give the teams time to adjust to parts of the change, they might not recover in time to maybe make that next delivery. Also, don't try to space them too close together. So I've seen this happen. I saw this happen a lot back in March and April as people were trying different tools and trying to get their team to adopt like 5 different tools at one time. And it just killed the productivity of the teams, and they had to just back off and say, no, it's too much. And also set some regular time. So even if you do more of a pull-based retrospective, try to find that regular cadence that allows people to stop and take a breath. So in summary, I want to encourage you to use those 3 mindsets when you're working with your distributed teams. Experiments are still important. Space them out where you can. Amplify the communication and collaboration. If you're doing some of those longer experiments, make that experiment information visible so people are aware of it, both those involved in experiments and those also impacted, like your stakeholders. And also, when practices are not working, when you translate them into remote, step back and look at what were some of the principles behind those practices. This is what allows you to develop a healthier business, especially in times of crisis, and to set that sustainable pace that is possible even with a remote team. All right.